Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr, a chroeso. Mae'n great I weld cymaint ohonoch chi heddiw. It's really nice to be here in so many ways, actually, because if you'd asked me nearly 3 years ago now, after the referendum, whether I'd be here being introduced as the Chief Executive of the Welsh European Funding Office, you might have doubted whether it was going to happen, but we are still very much in business, in very much the recognisable form that we've been in for a very long time. So what I want to do today is just recap where we are and who we are and what we do. Some of you will be obviously very familiar with that, others less so as you get to know us. Yes, mention the policy context that David has already touched on, but you've already been there to some extent, and I don't want to tread on Lee Waters' toes for this afternoon, so I might just mention that in particular, how it has a bearing on what we do and how we do it, and then explain a little bit more about where we think we are in terms of Brexit, insofar as anybody knows where we are in terms of Brexit, and what it means for the business that we're doing over the next few years. How do we change the slides on this? Here we are, next. There we are. So, who are we? We are based in the Welsh Government. We are effectively, oops, there we are. We are the staff. I am a Welsh Government civil servant. But we're kind of at arm's length. We are operationally independent of ministers because when all's said and done, this is, and still is, European money. So to some extent, we are acting as agents of the European Commission in deciding where the funds should be allocated, how they should be supporting individual projects, and how that's delivered. So the delivery, the maintenance, the compliance, all that side of it is independent of ministers. That's the managing authority function, and there's a certifying authority function based in the organisation as well, which reassures the European Commission that the bills that we send them are genuine charges on European budgets. Now, the policy context is really, really important because while we are, as I say, operationally independent, the programmes that we produce must support Welsh Government agenda. So before we even set forth at the beginning of each 7-year funding round, we agree our programmes with Cabinet, then we agree them with the European Commission. And actually, that's not very difficult because in the end, what kind of government doesn't want jobs and growth, which is really what all the funds are about. And in particular, there's a good deal of agreement between the European Commission and the Welsh Government about this whole agenda of clean energy, and marine energy in particular, given Wales's spectacular geographical opportunities in this respect. So, David touched on a few things here, just to pull out a few things you're saying about we're absolutely committed to marine energy. Is it worth it? Well, absolutely yes, to both of those from the Welsh Government's point of view. And as I say, that I'm sure the Deputy Minister for Economy and Transport will emphasise that later on. But it's important to us because partly it helps us secure that agreement from the Commission, whose money it still is for the time being at least, that this is a sensible way to be using the money. And partly because it gives us that kind of backing that we do need on occasion when you get the occasional adverse headline of the sort that David touched on earlier on. So it also supports us in that we're having to make some quite difficult decisions at this stage. The programmes overall are over 90% committed. So that's to say we've got contracts in place to spend most of the money that we are ever likely to get out of the EU for this programme. That's not the case for marine energy. Marine energy is a priority within the programme, which is actually quite a long way behind the curve on that. Now, it's not a criticism, because the nature of what we're doing in this kind of sector is such that it does have long lead times. It's difficult to get stuff through. You've got all consenting, you've got the partnerships that need put together and so on. It's by its nature, it's new stuff, it's difficult, I don't have to tell you that. So we can live with that, but on the other hand, there are some deadlines that we can't do anything about. So all of this money has to be spent by the end of December 2023, and that is a deadline that we can't change, regardless of whether we stay in, stay out, whatever kind of transition arrangements might happen. That deadline isn't going to go away. So we have to hold our breath a little bit, knowing that there's that long lead time in delivery, knowing that we aren't where we'd like to be in terms of commitment levels. Having that kind of support politically to say, yes, it's all right, take that risk, stick with it, go for it, is really important to us, and we're very grateful for it. So, I'm not going to dwell too much on this. You'll be familiar with some of these, and David ran through the the underlying documents that have been published by the Welsh Government over the last few years. It's a personal point of enthusiasm for Mark Drakeford, I have to say. When he took up office as First Minister, he came to talk to the senior civil service, and marine energy cropped up several times. It's clearly something which occupies his mind quite substantially, which is a massively supportive environment for us to be working in. But it's partly the all the green stuff, which is hugely important and so on, but it's also the stuff which is, Wales has a massive opportunity here, as David was touching on. There is a new industry growing worldwide, and Wales can be part of that, and the synergy of that opportunity with what Wales wants to do in terms of prosperity for all and the well-being of future generations is such a beautiful match that this is an obvious thing actually for the Welsh Government to be putting its weight behind. Oops, sorry. Talk about the priorities in marine energy then. The European programmes are probably the most detailed programmes you could wish to imagine in terms of what they set out to deliver. The set of targets that we work to is beyond anything that I would say that we have in terms of domestic programmes. They're monitored very closely. We're just about to go through a process of reviewing mid-term with the European Union where we're up to in those programs, what we've delivered, how much money we've spent already and how it's been spent and all that sort of thing. So that the monitoring of delivery and actually proving that we're making a difference in this context is tighter than any other area that I can think of. So all of these things have serious targets behind them. They're all things that are measured and need to be demonstrable. So it's important to you because this is kind of what we want. If you approach us saying, can you pay for our project? Can you support our project? The answer will be, yes, possibly, if you can help us achieve some of these things. So this is the quid pro quo, if you like. Because in the end, European money is the same as any other government budget. It's there to support a policy objective. It's there to achieve policy aims. And this is how those aims are expressed. So if you can help us, then there's a much better chance that we can help you. We touched on the money. These are the amounts involved. So you can see where we're up to with the total allocation of 146 million. And you can see that some of the numbers in that do actually look quite low. Given that we are now in 2019, it's supposed to be a 2014 to 2020 programme. So you'd kind of expect on the face of it to be a little bit further ahead. Now, there is a lot in the pipeline. There are a lot of projects at various stages of development. And if we can just sort of work our way through some of these issues in the next year or so, I'm confident that we will be able to make use of every penny of that. And we'll come back to how much of those pennies there are, how many of those pennies there are. But the possibility is there, but we do need to sort of crack on and make sure that we do take the full opportunity. Now, that allocation is a bit of an estimate. The funds that we use are agreed with the European Commission at the beginning of each 7-year period in euros. And we kind of have to guess how much those euros are going to be worth over the following 7 to 10 years. Should we leave the European Union without a deal and find ourselves dependent on the Treasury guarantee, then at least that element of the uncertainty goes away because the Treasury guarantee will be defined in sterling, of course. On the other hand, there will be other constraints, annuality, difference between capital and revenue expenditure and so on that we don't have to worry about at the moment that will affect how much of that funding is available. So that's working on an estimated rate of 117 to the pound over the remainder of the current programme. If there are significant changes, then we might find ourselves either constrained or with a bit of a windfall. It's happened in the past, you never know, of funding that we might be able to do a bit more with. It's one of the challenges every programme actually is trying to make sure that we programme enough to make sure that we use all of that programme funding without leaving the Welsh Government exposed in respect of commitments that I've made that I turn out not to have the funding to pay for. Okay, the whole Brexit thing. Let's talk about that. where it's all going, you are as well qualified as anybody else to guess, certainly as well qualified as I am. Where does it take us all? And bizarrely, to some extent, it doesn't matter in a sort of parochial manner. And talking just in the context of funding from the EU-funded programs into marine energy over the next few years, it's very much business as usual, come what may. And underneath that is the UK Treasury's guarantee in respect of all of the EU programs. Now, those of you who are already running projects will have had letters from us earlier this week, just emphasising this message, so bear with me if you're one of those, as I reiterate it. What that guarantee means is that, come what may over the next few weeks, the existing programs stay just as they are, and that goes for all of our existing, on both sides, rights and responsibilities, all of our obligations, all of our compliance requirements, and so on. They stay just the same. And there's a few reasons for that. Primarily, it revolves around the question of what would happen if we did leave without a deal. If we say you crash out at the end of next week, and we spend the weekend getting over the surprise that we actually did fall over the cliff in the end. We did allow it to happen. And on, the morning after, on the Monday after, we sit up and say, well, now what? And at that point, the UK will have some decisions to make about how it works its way through its relationship with the EU. Those conversations are unlikely to happen unless and until we've reached some agreement about funding. And one of the things that's on offer from the EU is for the UK to remain part of the existing fund programs through at least until the end of 2019, while we work out what does happen. And so there's all sorts of things that could happen and so on and so forth, but the message very clearly in black and white, in writing from the UK Treasury is, come what may over the next few weeks, nothing changes. And it just allows a bit of space for that conversation to happen. Should we find ourselves in a position where we've left without a deal, we've still got that space to decide just quite how the UK remains or otherwise in these funds. And if we've abandoned the current arrangements in the meantime, it makes that conversation very difficult. So that very clear direction is no change. The guarantee covers all the normal course of business. So we will be carrying on approving projects. We've got until the end of 2020 to approve projects under the guarantee, should it turn out that that is what we need. So that actually does give us a bit of a breather. And as I say, the far more of a challenge in some respects is that December 2023 date by which everything has to be done. What else are we going to say? Yes, sure.
Is there a typo in the second vote, or is it just a privilege for the first language Welsh? 2020, 2023.
Yeah, right, yes. Right, okay, both dates are relevant. Thank you. Sorry about that. No, it's not a privilege for Welsh speakers. No, let's not go there. No, the December 2020 deadline is the one by which we have to have our agreements in place. Our contractual agreements with the end beneficiaries, people like yourselves, have to be in place by the end of December 2020 to be brought within the scope of the guarantee. The delivery has to be completed by the end of 2023. So that's to say the expenditure has to be out of the door by the end of 2023 in order to be eligible to be covered by either the guarantee or the EU funding. And that's why that date is important. It's embedded there in the existing regulations for the existing programs. And because the guarantee covers things which are business as usual, that date doesn't go away. So yes, thank you for picking that out. We hadn't spotted that one. Program managing uncertainty. I've mentioned one of them. The exchange rate is already one of them. The route to market is another one. We're very conscious of the ongoing uncertainty, if you like, that is placed on all of your plans and all of your ambitions in terms of the UK government's views on strike prices and so on. It is something that we as a government, it's a little bit beyond the bounds of WEFO, but as I mentioned earlier on, we're still Welsh Government civil servants in the end. We don't lose sight of who pays our wages. So Welsh Government generally is very much engaged in this insofar as we can. So I just wanted to sort of reassure you of that. It's worth also mentioning perhaps at this stage before I close a few thoughts about what next. looking beyond the immediate sort of remainder of the current programme, on the assumption for a moment that we will actually leave the EU eventually, then we need to think about what regional policy is for. These funds ultimately fit within the area of the EU's budget which is known as cohesion policy. It's aimed at bringing together the less well-off regions of Europe and the better-off regions, closing the gap between the productivity of each of those extremes. Now, as we go into a post-Brexit world, that piece of thinking, that development of policy about what structural funds are actually for, what regional funds are actually for, is something that we have both the opportunity and the challenge of thinking about with a completely fresh pair of eyes. So a blank sheet of paper, if you like. And it's quite a contrast, if you think about it, to the way that we've been operating up until now, because the European regional policy context is something that's developed over many, many decades. It's something that kind of evolves. It doesn't go through fundamental change as you move from one 7-year funding period to the next. We, on the other hand, have this opportunity to really think about what's it for? How will we know whether it's succeeded? What are we actually trying to achieve here? Is it that cohesion agenda? Is it something slightly different? And the answer to that might be something quite different depending which bit of the UK you go to. So the Welsh Government's position on post-Brexit replacements for the structural funds is very clear. There are two sort of strands to it. One is that the amount of the funding that comes to Wales is no less than we get at the moment, as promised during the course of the referendum campaign. And the other is that the devolution settlement be respected. So the decisions about how regional economic support in Wales need to be made in Wales. And that's just compliant with the existing arrangements for devolution. You may be aware of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This is something that was announced in the Conservative Party's manifesto at the last general election. So since then, the UK government has been developing quite what it is and what it means and so on. We have yet to see the consultation issued on that, although I understand that the documentation is ready. So it's not very far away, potentially. But in the meantime, we have to kind of work our way through those questions about what regional funding is actually for and how we use it. Anyway, because we can't wait for these things to happen in sequence. If we wait until we know exactly how the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is going to work, how much is in it, how much has to be allocated and all that sort of thing, we'll never have something in place in time to pick up where the European funding leaves off in 3, 4, 5 years' time. So a lot of that work is happening. It's happening internally within the Welsh Government. It's happening with external stakeholders. We had our first meeting of our Regional Investment in Wales Steering Group a few weeks ago. And it was very positive. It was very progressive in terms of the collective understanding about the need to create something that works for the whole of Wales, for all sectors. So very positive work going on there. We're engaging the OECD to advise us on how we deal with the kind of multi-level governance that we have within Wales across Welsh Government, local authorities and so on. How do we work our way through that? How do we make the most of that as we go into a post-Brexit regional funding arrangement? So lots of stuff going on in that, and I'll obviously be very pleased to see you engaged in that. And it brings me back to where we started in terms of the policy side of things. You know, that the Welsh Government's commitment to marine energy on this is something that will be a strand throughout all of that work. It isn't going to go away. Quite the opposite, really. Having got as far as we have, having made the kind of progress that David was talking about over the last 10 years, that's something we definitely won't want to let go of. So just to mention one last thing that actually Helen asked me to mention in particular, the ORGIP consultation. Thank you for the survey contributions for that. There will be a final report on that on the Welsh Government's website presently. So the views of you as a community are something that we will definitely want to be picking up on as we go into the future, whatever that might be. Thank you very much.